they stick to these random subjects. There is a difference between beauty and truth. What does it sound like?
Conclusion.
This ends up being the conclusion, right? After all is a
Premise indicator.
premise indicator. Rachel, did you know that? Yes? Okay. After all, if there were no difference, then the most realistic pieces of art would be the best as well. Okay. So if beauty and truth were one and the same, then if something were the most realistic, if it were 100% true, or at least as true as we can get it, the more true it is, the more beautiful, right? Are you guys cool with this reasoning?
Mm-hmm.
Is this making sense?
Wait, no.
Okay, so they're saying
really
that there's a difference between beauty and truth. Beauty and truth are not the same thing, and the reason that beauty and truth are not the same thing is that if they were the same, if beauty and truth were one and the same, then if you made something more realistic than anything else, the most realistic pieces of art,
So the most true.
the most true, because they're the most realistic, would
Okay.
also be the most beautiful. But they don't say would be the most beautiful. What do they say?
Best as well.
The best. Yeah, the best, in
Okay.
addition to the most realistic. The problem is, wait, if you're the best, does that mean that you're beautiful? I'm talking about art here. I don't know, right? It's not really clarified. Okay, since the most realistic pieces are the most truthful, that's connecting realism to truth, but many of the most realistic artworks are not among the best. There it goes again. They need to say, but many of the most realistic artworks are not among the most beautiful. Then we could be like, oh, see, realism and beauty are not the same, and we already know that realism is the same as truth because they told us that. But this argument never connects the best to the most beautiful. So, let us go into the answers. A, the most beautiful artworks are the best artworks. This seems like a necessary assumption. We need to connect these two. What answers were we debating?
C and D.
C.
C and D. Is that right? Okay, C. None of the best artworks are realistic. The argument says many of the most realistic artworks are not among the best, right? It's just choosing a few to prove the point. Do we need it? Remember, this is a necessary assumption. Do we need it to be true that none of the best are realistic? Maybe realism and truth are not the same, but you could have a few of the best artworks that are realistic in some way, shape, or form. It's not a killer. That's the same problem with D. Only the best artworks are beautiful. Well, you could have... There's another problem here, and that is both of these answer choices are dealing with absolute terms as opposed to relative terms, right? Because the original argument is talking about the most realistic and the most beautiful and the most truthful, and this is just saying only the best artworks are beautiful. Well, no, what if a good artwork is beautiful? Is that a problem? Maybe it's just not the most beautiful. That's different. Yeah.
Hold on. Actually, just give me a moment. Well, actually, no. I don't know if I can defend it, but I'm just gonna explain what confused me with and like started making me think about these. Is that many of the most realistic artworks are not among the best. So then I kind of started to, I couldn't like prove it directly, but I started to vaguely think that they need to be among the best if they are, if beauty is to equal truth. And I know that we're still one step away because that's realistic equaling best, not truth equaling best. But I think that's what tripped me up there. Any thoughts?
Well, so I guess my concern with D when it says only the best artworks are beautiful, I'm like, well, other artwork could be beautiful, just not the most beautiful.
So like beauty and truth could be the same, but also like beauty and purple could be the same. Like it sorry,
That's okay. Very
But
interesting.
I think I actually need that, because like, it doesn't, it's back to the like necessary thing, I think, where like, if, just because beauty equals truth and therefore maybe best equals beauty,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that nothing else could equal beauty, is what you're saying.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that the original argument is just focused on the extreme ends of each of these things, right? The most realistic, the most truthful, and the best, which is itself among the top. And so when it says only the best artworks are beautiful, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, what if one good artwork was also beautiful? That doesn't necessarily destroy the argument as long as it's somewhat realistic. Or in this case, not realistic. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I guess all I'm trying to do is find an exception. Because if this doesn't need to be true 100% of the time, then it's not a necessary assumption.
Right.
So, like, what if something right below best is beautiful?
I guess I'm getting tripped up on the relative terms in all of this, because
Well, that's exactly why I just want to limit it to those things, because I'm just asking myself what absolutely needs to be assumed. And the evidence is sticking to the relative, the best, the most beautiful, the most truthful, the most realistic.
well, I guess when I'm looking at that, like, if like the best works are beautiful, then can anything be like talking about like the most beautiful artworks are the best? If these are just beautiful, wouldn't that kind of take that, like, what can be, I don't know. I'm just getting tripped up on like why, I guess, would D be more of like a sufficient in that case? Like, just because it's not the most beautiful, it can still be beautiful?
I guess I'm still just gravitating to, like,
I don't know, I feel like this is
What
what I was
about-
trying to diagram out, but like, I don't know how, like, I really don't know how
well,
to
the
start.
diagram here would be if something is beautiful, then it's the best. But we don't need it to be everything that's beautiful is the best. We just need the most beautiful things to be the best. Like, so this is all on a scale. This is why these are relative terms. Anyone else have a way of looking at it that might help? Yeah.
Wait, so you're saying that if it's, can you repeat like how you would diagram the original argument?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily diagram it.
Well, like what you just said.
Yeah, so here's what I'm thinking as I'm reading this, right? And if you go back to the original argument, the premises are focusing on, at the very beginning it says, after all, if there were no difference, then the most realistic pieces of art would be the best. So when you're talking about the most realistic ones, it's like you have a pile of realistic art.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just saying, well, let's talk about the ones that are the most realistic. So it's this small subset. And you're saying, you take the most realistic ones in that pile, they would have to be among the best. And you're like, well, wait.
But at least one of them is not, right?
Yeah, but some of them are not. Yeah. And all we're talking about is that little subset right here. And all of a sudden, answer choice D comes in and says, only the best artworks are beautiful, as opposed to the most beautiful. Because we're comparing, it's like we're looking at these subsets.
Yeah, so wouldn't it be like kind of the opposite? Like if it's the most beautiful, then it's the best.
It's
right?
just switching.
So it would switch it. So it's, D is
Mhm.
basically saying if it's the best, then it's beautiful, but it's not.
It's exactly, it's
Like,
switch.
yeah.
False contrapositive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the key here is, it's also failing the relative. Like, you can look at it either way because it's too broad.
Yeah.
But only introduces the then clause.
Right.
So this becomes if beautiful then the best, as opposed to, I mean, I actually don't think that's a problem here. I'm not sure if it's a false contrapositive.
It is backwards. It is.
I don't know that it is, because the
So-
original says the most beautiful are the best. So if beautiful, then best. That's the same, it's going in the same direction as D.
Well, D says best to beautiful.
D says beautiful the best. Because it says only the best artworks are beautiful. In other words, if
not
something
saying
is
the
beautiful,
only.
then it's got to be the best. So and that's the same thing that A is doing. So
it's not. It's saying that it.
I think it is. That's okay. So like, let's do a different example. Only people who take the LSAT can go to law school. So is that saying if you take the LSAT, then you go to law school?
No.
That's saying if you go to law school, then you took the LSAT.
Yeah.
And that's what D is saying. Only the best are beautiful.
Yep. Got it.
So I think this might, and that's the same direction that answer choice A is going. It says the most beautiful are the best. So
Yeah.
I think it's just this answer choice is too broad by sticking to the absolute rather than to the relative, because it's talking about all beautiful things rather than just the most beautiful. Yes.
I just have one more question on this. So the thing that like eventually really threw me off with A was actually just that, was the most beautiful, because even though they specify the most beautiful, they don't ever talk about the most beautiful, they just talk about beautiful and truthful together.
Well, and so you didn't like the fact that it was talking about the most
That it
beautiful?
suddenly introduced most, yeah.
Well, no, so I think that's actually what's good about this, because it's narrowing the scope of this answer choice.
Uh-huh,
It's saying what has to be assumed? Well, we have to assume that the most beautiful ones
uh-huh.
are the best. Do we have to make that assumption for all the beautiful ones? Not necessarily, because the evidence doesn't go into those other subsets.
Right, okay, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Otherwise, we'd have to be comparing the rest of the beautiful things to the other, like the average realistic or the least realistic.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the most helpful thing was the circle thing that you said with like, these could all be, like you kind of just said again, but the visualization of the circle is helpful. Where you have like a portion of it where this is the most of like the realistic and all these different things.
Yeah, it's like we have these piles, and we're
Yeah.
just talking about the best in each one of those
Yeah.
groups.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I did mean to ask, so under what kinds of indicator words are used in a passage, or in a passage, when the assumption is going to require the word only? Like, does it, like,
It's
does
not
it,
that simple, unfortunately.
okay, so there aren't
It
words
would
that
just
are,
be an absolute, yeah.
so they'll have to say only in these cases, so there has to be an absolute in the passage then.
Yeah, it's got to be that
Okay,
strong
cool.
of a necessary something. Like
Yeah.
we'd really need that big of a gap. We're like, oh,
Gotcha.
we need all that. Yeah.
So in cases like this,
Mm-hmm.
where in the majority of this conversation, like in the majority of the stimulus, it's isolating itself to a specific portion. In this case, it's like most realistic or most beautiful. You would want to find something that reciprocates that relative term.
In a necessary assumption question,
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to go beyond that
Yeah, you don't wanna
because
go
it's
beyond the
not
scope.
necessary to make assumptions about other parts of the
Okay.
group. That's the best way to think about it, I think.
Okay.
Okay. Sound good? Oh, at the very least, this might get you focused on relative versus absolute. Right? Like, oh, we're just talking about these little subsets, and that can be one way to think about it.